Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shai Lewis. I'm here with Nina Roesner. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connection so you can have a thriving marriage. So today we are discussing attachment theory and boundaries and what that looks like in your relationships. This month, we're going to be focusing on attachment styles in general. So we're hoping that as we explore each one, you can evaluate yourself and your relationships and maybe come away with some more healthier ways to interact. All right, so before we get started, I want to mention our website, greaterimpactwives.org. This is where you can find a free PDF called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We also have a free marriage assessment for you to check out. Take some time, answer the questions, and if you feel led, reach out to us and we'll direct you to the right person. All right, so welcome, Nina. What are your thoughts around the subject of attachment theory?
I love this stuff. Susan Johnson, Dr. Susan Johnson, has done a ton of work around this topic. And I was at a Gottman conference one time, and he was talking about a conversation he had with her where they were just basically laying it out there that all of our conflicts in marriage come from attachment wounds, that our injuries, the way we hurt each other, the way we want to connect, all of that can have this underlying drive of attachment wounding. And so understanding this particular concept is a huge deal for your marriage. There's gobs of free assessments out there, like you can just Google that and here you go, take them and figure out which one you are. It will help you navigate this. I'm really excited about the topic. Glad you picked it.
It's a fun one. And I was looking it up and it came from an experiment I read from, it's called The Strange Situation. This was done in 1969. And they basically looked at babies and their mothers in a room and they let them play for a little bit and then the mom leaves and then they observe the baby. And that's kind of how they formulated these different styles. And so there's, yeah, 4 different types. And so just really quickly for our listeners who aren't familiar with those styles, the first one is the secure attachment. And this is where most of us fall. About 58% of adults fall into this category. And this attachment style is where you are comfortable with both intimacy and autonomy. You typically trust your partner, you can handle closeness, and you can manage conflict pretty easily. And then there's the anxious, preoccupied attachment, and this is where about 19% of the population falls into. And in this style, you tend to seek closeness and reassurance, but you also fear abandonment. So you kind of have some challenges around trusting people. And then you have the dismissive attachment, which is about 23% of the population. And this is where you like independence. You rely on yourself and you sort of distance yourself from others. You might have some difficulties with vulnerability in there too. And then the last one is fearful attachment, fearful avoidant attachment. This is the least common and probably the most difficult one because you have a blend of anxiety and avoidance. You crave the connection, but then you push the people away at the same time. So yeah, that one's less common, but it definitely exists. And they say that these attachment styles can actually change over time based on your life experiences. Trauma can affect it, life transitions can affect it. And it even changes when you deal with different people. So depending on who you are in relationship with, your attachment style can change, which I find very interesting. So obviously therapy and self-awareness can help with this, but wanted to get your thoughts, Nina, on any of those. Anything stand out to you?
Oh man, I've if you were to describe this, my history, I think I fit into pretty seriously the anxious,
Mm.
preoccupied initially for very many years in like all of my relationships until I got into a job in my early 20s that forced me to not be that anymore. And but I was able to fairly quickly evolve into secure attachments in business and then in friendships and then in my intimate relationships and then that eventually carried over into marriage. But when you look at did I have some dismissive? Oh yeah. I think I like it would have been a perfect recipe of some sort of cocktail with a splash of this and a little bit of that here and there throughout the whole thing. The last category you talk about, the fearful avoidant.
Mm.
Boy, that's like a starving dog that's wild. You put beef down in front of it and it's like, you're not safe for me, but I'm starving. So I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna grab a bite and I'm gonna run. You know, that whole thing. And you add that to a relationship dynamic. I don't think I had much of that. But we see all of these styles in the marriage intensive and the people that we work with. And what's really cool is God heals us and he wants us to be securely attached to him first and foremost. And when we can nail that, it's astonishing that that secure attachment then filters out into all of our relationships. So it's really cool to see this as a space where we can overcome fear and lack of connection. We can become securely attached. It happened to me. It happens to our clients. Like it's a thing. So lots of hope here.
Awesome. I love that. So let's talk about that. We're going to focus today on the anxious attachment style. Lucky
Great.
you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my former
Um,
self.
so yes, this style is typically where you have a lot of trust issues. And I was just doing a quick search on Chat GPT, and it says with this attachment style, you tend to have to set boundaries in a way that's less threatening. Um, so yeah, one of the first things it suggests is that we understand the triggers of the person that has the anxious attachment because they need so much. They fear abandonment, rejection, they need constant reassurance. And if you try to set a boundary, they can interpret that as a lack of love. So, what are your thoughts around just, yeah, how to approach that person and trying to understand them as a first um, way to deal with them?
They're like a newborn baby, but really, I mean, the worst examples of that. And meaning, where are you? And then crying. Like it's a very emotional place. And there's obviously a spectrum of this, just how intense are you? But if you're in a relationship with somebody who's fearfully attached to you and anxious about it, what happens is you could just be having a work day and you haven't talked to them for 3 hours and you get a text from them of you don't love me anymore. Like, wait, hold up. Like, what is this? Well, they've spent the last 3 hours since you left spinning up because you didn't kiss them goodbye because you were thinking about a presentation you have in 45 minutes that you forgot the slides for, you didn't give or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. So you're a little distracted and then bammo, they are totally making it about them and they go to the worst possible place really fast. So when, to your point about how do you communicate with that, it's, hey, I love you. I got a busy day this morning. I'm not going to be talking to you all day because I need to focus at work today. And you may have to say that 28 times, but you have to do that. And it will half kill them. But you need to hold to those boundaries that you give them because otherwise they're going to create more in their head
Mhm.
and then they'll push for that. This is the classic wife chasing her husband around the room, forcing him to talk to her thing. Yeah, and even out the door. They're not good at giving space to other people. And so when we need a break from their intensity, we need to, and it's good for them, by the way. It's really good for them to say, "Hey, I love you. I'm gonna go hang out. I'm gonna go play a round of golf with my buddies and or my girlfriends. I'm gonna go do this thing and I'll be back in 4 hours. I'm not gonna be checking my phone. So, you can text me if you want to, but I'm not gonna be, and then you hold to that. And it sounds awful. So you combine reassurance with space and then you stick to whatever you say. You have to be super consistent with that.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I'm thinking about parenting in that example and how, as my kids, I've watched them get older, they learn to trust you more when you leave, that you're gonna come back.
Mhm.
It's a thing like when they're little, they don't trust you and
Right.
they cry and it's because they haven't had enough practice, to your point, of seeing mommy return. And so you have to be patient, is what I'm hearing with it,
Yes.
because over time they will realize eventually the relationship is safe because you're
Mhm.
returning. So I got
Yeah. And you can call them up to a higher level of being too, because they'll bring all sorts of crazy to the relationship. I mean, and we all do. This isn't judgment. And I've been this, so I know that. Right? So, we'll be thinking, we'll say things like, well, you said this and you're thinking blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I'm not. And gosh, I'm so sorry you're thinking that. That's a horrible place to be. You have a lot of empathy. And after a while, you need to call them up to a higher place. Hey, sweetheart, I know that you mean well with expressing these fears and things, but when you communicate to me that you think I'm having an affair when I'm 20 minutes late and it's traffic, like that's not good for our relationship. That's you communicating about my character to me. And so I want you to stop doing that.
Mhm.
And that calls people up to, so because fear will destroy relationships if you listen to it and act on it. And even the strongest of most secure of people get tired of being accused of 28 things because of somebody else's fear, right?
Right.
Yeah. So when we, and it's a Dale Carnegie principle too, when you call people to a nobler motive, when you think the best, and that's a Gottman stat too. Healthy couples think the best of each other. So if you're bringing this thing, well, I'm worrying that you're, seeing other women, or I'm worrying that you have a porn addiction, and I'm worrying that you're like, stop that. If this is you, don't communicate about it. If your partner's this way, have some empathy for a bit and then start calling them up into a space that's healthy for the relationship because that kind of communication is not good for the relationship.
Absolutely. All right. So the second boundary for this attachment style is kind of what we're talking about, communication, being clear and gentle, but firm in your language. So I think you touched on that already. So we can actually move to the next one, which is being consistent. Um, Sticking to your boundaries and making things predictable, I think also helps with this attachment style, because in that time frame when you're setting the boundary and they're learning to adjust, predictability is happening,
Mhm.
whether it feels like it or not. Everybody is adjusting to this new dynamic, and if we're not able to stick to the boundary, then we sort of give mixed signals and we can confuse the person and sort of delay the progress. What are your thoughts around being consistent?
Yeah, well, even when we are consistent, they're creating all sorts of garbage in their head anyway. So we don't want to add to that by not being consistent. And, there's a verse that says everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. That orderly thing. Oh boy. So having a schedule and sticking to it, letting your yes be yes and your no be no, being the person of integrity so that people know what they're getting when they interact with you consistently. They may still have trust issues. That won't be your causing it though, if that makes sense. You won't be contributing to that in a way that could be prevented. And so when they have those trust issues, not if when, you can, then level up a little bit more with them around, how should we be interacting around these things? Because what you're doing right now is not useful to the relationship. So it can be hard for some people, even securely attached people. That doesn't mean that you're naturally organized and consistent with your behavior. And women especially see these things totally differently. We have different ways of looking, like there's nuancy everything. Men are much better at this, I think, than women are in terms of consistency. But when we need to like walk around in their shoes and be like, okay, is this the same as it was last time? Even though there's some differences, could they interpret it like that? And
Mm,
then do simple conscientious things like text and say, hey, I'm going to be 20 minutes late. There's a tree down over 132 and I've got to reroute. Letting them know that you're gonna be late and the why of it. And usually I'm not a big fan of why, but this helps someone that's anxious and fearfully attached. It really does. So
yeah, it does. It can feel like an annoyance or, something you don't feel like doing. But if you're interested in a healthy relationship and creating safety, it's worth it.
yeah,
So,
and I think it comes into play in those spaces where we would be inconsistent, that we would give a why, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And the next boundary, I think, is reaffirming the relationship. I mean, we're kind of, I hate to say it, I feel like we're being a broken record here, but it's just really a lot of reassurance that you're giving the person because they just need to know that they're safe. The study itself was just based on creating safety and what that looks like. And sometimes this attachment style needs to know you're just not going anywhere and that your connection with them is safe and that you are not rejecting them. And so that might just mean saying that out loud to help calm them down. Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
That's such a big deal. We have a boundary we have everybody in the marriage intensive take on right out of the gate. And it is, I have zero conversations when emotional or when there's emotionality. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that we need to take a break from a conversation when I get upset or my partner gets upset. So when that's occurring, that can be really triggering for somebody who's fearful and anxious in the relationship. Their attachment style, it gets triggered with, hey, I need to take a break. It's like, hold up, wait, let's solve this. We can work through anything, and they chase you around the room trying to finish the thing. And it's like, no, no, time out. And so we teach people to say, hey, I love you. I want to do this well. We're going to take a break for about a half hour, maybe longer, and then we're going to come back to it. So I need to go sort myself out and you can do that too. And then they do this thing that we call the connection steps. It's a prayer process. But to tell them, hey, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a break. We're
Mm-hmm.
coming back to it. And that's the thing that really communicates in a way that's comforting because knowing that this isn't going to just get shot off the table and then forevermore, amen, we're never going to talk about it, which happens a lot, especially if you're married to one of the other attachment styles. You had dismissive avoidant there, like, whoa, you ain't ever going to talk about this again. Like, and your fearful person knows that. So they're like, no, we have to do it right now. You know, so when we got people together, it's like, you're going to get a chance. Here's when that's going to happen. So
Mm-hmm.
that reassures them. It's also just like whether you're fearful, avoidant or not, or fearful, anxious, whether you've got that or not, it's good human relation skills to give people an expectation around when are we going to finish this conversation. So that then puts me on notice that I need to be working out, well, where am I at? Why was I so upset about this? What do I really care about? How do I think about my partner? Like there's 100 things that we can be using that time for in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that we're coming back to it, it raises the bar on the marriage and the interaction. So when people have that expectation in there, then they're going to sort differently than if they think it's just over. So we want to communicate. And that's one of the biggest complaints that people have. And I can usually get an idea of, okay, we might be dealing with some insecure attachment stuff when their biggest complaint is we never solve anything. Like they just shut me down and then we never, like it's just over. And then we never finish a discussion. We never solve a problem. It's like, okay. And I keep asking and I keep trying to get them to, it's like, okay, might be some things going on here that we can work on because that energy is really, really not good. It can
Mhm.
feel very controlling and mothery, and yeah, it feels like people think you're immature, even, but it's just, it doesn't need to be there. And it comes from a really insecure place, as do
Mhm.
the others. And
Mhm.
that's why they call it secure versus insecure. And there's three different types of insecure. So, and
Mhm.
you can have combinations of those things going on, by the way. It's not like, okay, you're this,
That's true.
you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
You can have a combination of two or three at the same time. The other thing I wanted to say as I'm listening to you is that it's not just important to say you're coming back, it's also important to actually do that because
Oh, hey.
that's like the worst thing you could do is, for a fearful or avoid or anxious attachment is say I'm coming back and then don't do it. That's like throwing a wrench into the whole thing. So, yeah, any thoughts about words versus actions in dealing with that?
Well, it's, your earlier point about being consistent, that integrity really needs to be there so that we can be trustworthy.
Yeah.
And we're not doing this because somebody needs us to babysit them or whatever. It's like, no, keep your word. You
Yeah.
let your yes be yes, your no be no, and show up with integrity because that's who God is and that He's in you and that is your identity. And so when we do that, it just creates an environment that has more trust in it naturally. It makes it easier for people to level up in their attachment. They still have work to do. I know I had to do a lot of work, and it's terrifying. This is the thing that people need to know. If you're fearful, anxious, attached, if that's you, you're already fearful and anxious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so the leveling up from there, you're going to be fearful and anxious as you do that.
Mm.
Okay. And so the playing out of this is okay. So my spouse says to me, I love you. We're going to take a break from this conversation. Let's talk at, 5 o'clock tonight. And you're like, okay. And nothing in you wants to do that. Everything in you, every cell in you is like, no, we need to solve this right now. And you're going to resist that temptation to
Yes.
go have it out, to go force the conversation. And you're going to sit and sweat about it till 5 o'clock comes. And then you're probably going to do exactly the same thing you did in the conversation 2 hours before because you haven't settled your mind yet. And that's the biggest thing. Fearful avoidance is this big rush of cortisol. It's this big worry. I think it's like demons on patrol, man. It's just a big old parade in your head of everything that's terrible. And it takes a minute to get a hold of that. And so I've seen people that are secure working with somebody who's fearful and anxious, and they're like, hey, I love you. Looks like this is not a good time either. Let's do something else for a while and we'll come back to this. And again, it's going to be awful.
Yeah.
The more you ride that out, and this is that scripture that says, submit to God,
Mm-hmm.
resist the enemy,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
he
he
will flee.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you got to resist the temptation to be controlling, force your partner to do this thing when it's unhealthy, because these conversations aren't going well anyway.
Right.
Stop participating in them. Fight the demon within you or that's
Yes.
coming at you. Like, I don't know how that works. Could be your own thoughts, right? I don't know. But you got to stop doing that stuff. And for fearful, anxious people, that is a really hard thing to do. And when they overcome that, and I'm tooting my own horn here because I know the amount of work that's involved in this. It's awful. You feel
Mm-hmm.
like and I see people with texts, and they're like, they'll text me. Some of my clients will be like, I texted him 3 hours ago. He hasn't responded. I'm like, okay. Have you done the connection steps over this? Well, no, and the first assignment I give them is to back off. And if
Yeah.
you text your spouse something and they text you something back, wait 17 minutes before you respond. And it
Hmm.
half kills them. I get so many with new clients. I get so many. I'm in the middle of my 17 minutes and I don't think I'm going to make it. Hey, you're texting me instead. That's awesome. Way to go. You know, because it's hard.
It is hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're rewiring your brain.
Yes.
And that is not easy when you have operated for so long doing things this way, freaking out and panicking and going through life that way. And then suddenly you have to change that. That takes time, it takes work, and it takes really allowing God to enter into that space with you. I think that's the most beautiful part of it, too, is when the boundary is set, not only is the person setting the boundary having time with the Lord, but you are as well. And I think we miss that sometimes because we're so focused on the thing.
Yep.
And yeah, I love that. I love that you have emphasized the work that it takes from going from this mindset to that because it's not easy for
Mhm.
anybody to change their thinking pattern. So,
Right. And this is really important too. If you're married to this attachment style, they're not going to change their thinking pattern if all you do is validate and empathize and cajole them.
mm,
You got to call them up to a higher level of being, or they're going to keep going through this. They're going to stay stuck. It's not good for them. If you love them, you're going to call them up to a higher level of being in this space. You know, and it's a behavioral science thing that applies to like all mammals. You got to face the thing you're afraid of, and then you'll be different. You know, I train horses and dogs, and I don't, with them, it's real fast because they're different than humans. They don't get
mm,
a lot of validation from me. There's no, oh, are you No, sorry, no. Children, I will do that with. You know, I'll empathize with an adult. I teach validation, absolutely. But with animals, it's like, stop that. No, that's not who you are. You know, knock it off.
mm,
And it's not aggression, but there's absolutely no tolerance for it because it's not like I ride horses. It's not good for that animal to be anxious. That's dangerous,
yes,
right?
correct.
Same thing
Yes.
with aggressive dogs or certain dog breeds. Anxiety is not good for them. So you have to train that out of them. Human beings can have that trained out of them too. So for us to just be all empathy and all of that, it sounds counterintuitive. Well, isn't that loving? Like, no, it's not. It is not loving to rescue somebody in their anger because you're just going to have to do it all over again. They will not grow from that. So you have, yes, validate, but then call up. So it's kind of an important thing if you're married or raising kids, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Two more before we wrap up. Boundaries that you can use for this attachment style. Encouraging them to have their own independence and their own self-worth, the sense of self-worth. And that can be through therapy, as I said earlier, having mindfulness, healthy hobbies, routines, just really getting them to a place where their identity is more secure in Christ. Any thoughts about that?
No, I think you're spot on. You know, they have to have their own interests.
Yeah.
Everybody does. So, you know, will you go execute on those? Yes, please do. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it just kind of pulls you off, pulls your energy, your anxious energy off of your spouse too.
Yes, for
So,
sure. Good point.
all right. And then also knowing your own limits is the last point to make here, knowing that you're really not responsible for someone else's emotions, even in your boundary setting. You're really not trying to control the person as much as you're trying to take care of yourself and the relationship in general. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Mhm. Yep, you're absolutely right, as usual.
All right, let's move into our next segment, which is the question of the day. And this is where we pull questions from our clients who have either been in our course or in our coaching. And we know that there's nothing new under the sun. So, more than likely, you've dealt with this, or you know someone, or you may deal with this in the future. So, one client writes, I am struggling with a decision my husband is wanting to make. He needs my approval. It's kind of a gray area biblically, so it's not a sin issue necessarily. It doesn't bring harm to our family or anything. She says when she does the steps, she feels like she doesn't want to give him her approval or disapproval because his decisions are his own. She wants to tell him how she feels and encourage him, but she also wants to shy away from any conflict that might come from her expressing disapproval. Um, she doesn't want to take the easy way out. So she's just asking, can you guide her on how to speak up versus miss an opportunity to influence her husband?
Right. And at the end of the day, everybody's wondering, what does God want? Right. So this situation is just ripe for easy submission. And what I mean by that is an openness to her husband. I have a client whose husband wanted to take a huge chunk of money and start a business. And they could do it. It would make things really, 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 really tight for them, um, crazy tight. And she ran the numbers and she was a little panicked. But she also knew that if he didn't do this, because he was talking about this has always been my dream and this opportunity's here and just all this stuff. So she knew if she wasn't fully supportive with that, there would be problems later. Matter of fact, some piece of his soul might be missing or not fulfilled. And she also didn't know what God wanted.
Mm,
She was just really open to the Lord and to her husband. She's like, "Yeah, let's take a look at that. Absolutely. Like let's explore that." He said, "Well, you go do this on it." And so she would, had some things and sent him back information and then he went out and he talked to the person and then he's like, "Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about this." So they sit down and she's just listening. And there's a piece of her that's like, "I think this is a terrible idea, but right." But she also knew that the vision that God gave her is, will you trust me? Will you trust God, right?
mm,
And she knew that no matter what happened, that God was in control and it was going to be okay no matter what. So what happened was the husband walks her through this whole discussion he had with the guy that was selling the business and just all the details around all of that. And as she was listening, she was just hearing her husband say, "The concern I have about this, though, is this." And it was a concern that she had. And so she just listened and had some, "Oh, that's interesting," thoughts around that. And then same thing happened with another thing, and so the concerns that she had were starting to be talked about. And then he said, "I don't know what the money would look like." And she said, "Well, you asked me to do that. So I sent that to you." He goes, "Well, let me look at it." And he goes, "Oh, this is a terrible idea." And
wow.
she goes, "Well, it maybe not. I mean, we could make that work." And he goes, "Yeah, but I know myself pretty well, and I can see myself in like 2 years, because it takes a while to, establish yourself and then make it happen. And even though he's already got customers and everything, like, what if I feel tied down to this thing so much that I resent it? And then on top of that, I've been living a thin lifestyle that we've kind of grown accustomed to not living." So he talked himself, and so she was like, "So what do you think?" And he goes, "I think I don't want to do this." She's like,
Wow.
"Okay, okay then." So couple key elements. Number one, she was open to whatever God wanted, right? So she was praying, and she told me this after she did the whole story. She said, "I was praying for wisdom for my husband. And I was praying that my concerns would be addressed. But what's cool is the Lord brought all of those things to him. And I see him do this all the time. And this is what the First Peter 3:6 verses, or 3:1 through 6 are about. She wins him over with a gentle and quiet spirit. Like, she's not arguing with him. She's just there. She's listening. She's for her
Mhm.
husband. She
Mhm.
doesn't know what the right answer is. Like, God could choose to say, "Dude, let's go do this, and then I'll make you really wealthy." And that could have been how this turned out. Like, who knows? Or it could have been, "You're going to file for bankruptcy. This is going to fail." And but that would have been the journey that God had for them. So she, above all else, she trusted God. She prayed for her husband, and she was open to her husband. And I don't think there's any better definition of submission than being open to the man, even if you disagree with the idea, and letting God rule in those circumstances. It's a great place to be. And so all of us are thinking, well, I'm not buying a business, we're just trying to get Jimmy home from soccer. It's like, yeah, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Same exact thing. Doesn't matter what the context is. Can you be open to your husband, submitting to God, whatever that's going to be, and go, you know what, Lord, at the end of the day, you are always more than enough, no matter the outcome. So that's what I'd tell her. I'd tell her that story.
Oh, that's a good one. I love when God shows up like that because you could see him also dealing with each of them individually and then
Mm,
bringing them together. And that's like ideal. So doesn't get better than that.
amen.
All right. So what will you do with the information you have today? We invite you again, check out our website and also check out another episode, the next episode on how to manage conflict in difficult situations. Thanks for joining today. We will see you next time.